All right, so now we're ready to talk about the geological and biological history of the Earth. However, a lot of this you don't need to know for the exam. So it's pretty important that you listen to this and understand what parts to concentrate on. So I do want you to know the number 4.5 billion years. So that's the approximate age of the Earth. Okay, and then, but you already know how the Earth started because we talked about this when we talked about the formation of the solar system. So this is not going to be on the exam. We also talked about the formation of the moon. So it's not going to be on the exam. We also talked about the formation of the atmosphere of the Earth and the formation of the oceans of the Earth. It's not going to be on the exam. But you should recognize that the early atmosphere of the Earth consisted of carbon dioxide and methane and ammonia, which you can't breathe. So for the roughly, the Earth is 4.5 billion years, and for 4 billion years of Earth's history, you would not have been able to breathe on the Earth's surface because the atmosphere wasn't ready yet. Okay, this is going to be on the exam. So you got to know what was the earliest kind of life and where did it form. So we think that the earliest form of life was bacteria, and it formed next to underwater volcanoes, and it would have eaten the materials that came out of the volcano. All right, these are other kinds of living organisms, and what do they eat? Don't worry about it. I just want you to see that bacteria can eat just about anything. So no matter what the substance is, there is a bacteria that can digest it. But we're going to only be concerned with, at first, this kind of bacteria that actually ate sulfur, hydrogen sulfide, that would come out of these volcanoes. Okay, got to know this. So the next major breakthrough in life on Earth was a kind of bacteria that would eat carbon dioxide, and as a byproduct it would produce oxygen. So now we've got a bacteria that is pumping oxygen into the atmosphere. Photosynthetic bacteria. And this is going to start to modify the atmosphere. Now at first, this oxygen goes into the water and it rusts the iron and it makes the red beds. Don't worry about it, okay? Okay, the Earth has had many supercontinents. So times in which the continents have come together to make a supercontinent. This is called Rodinia. And so this is the supercontinent that came before Pangaea. And why Rodinia is important is that it triggered an ice age that covered the entire planet in a sheet of ice to a depth of 1 mile. And we think that the average global temperatures were negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit. But as this thing broke apart, it released heat that melted the ice. Now the reason why this is important is because this is the starting point for this set of videos that shows how the continents have moved around. So when you start this animation, it shows the breaking up of Rodinia, and then the reassembling of those continents to make Pangaea. So I'm not going to ask you any questions about Rodinia. Okay, so now let's go to And so if you want, you can be watching this video as I'm talking about this, but I'm not going to ask you any questions about where were the continents located at during a particular time period. Okay, so what you should know is that about 500 million years ago is called the Cambrian explosion, and we go from stuff that you can't, this microscopic organisms, to all of a sudden we've got these macroscopic organisms that are swimming around in the ocean. So the first life, again, is taking place in the oceans. There's nothing on the land because there was no ozone layer. So remember that ozone is O3. So until there was enough O2 in the atmosphere, there could not be enough O3 to make an ozone layer to shield against ultraviolet light, so there could not be anything on the continents because the radiation would kill it. You're not responsible for knowing the names of any of that kind of stuff, but notice we do have the first ozone layer. Okay, let's not worry about any of that. You should know that the first plants would have been mosses and lichens, teeny tiny little plants close to the shoreline on the continents. Okay, then let's not worry about it. You notice that the animals are getting bigger. Okay, okay, Appalachian Mountains. You should know where the Appalachian Mountains came from. So as North America collided with Europe and then later with Africa, that pushed up the Appalachian Mountains in on the eastern coast of the United States. Okay, ought to know what were the first kinds of animals to crawl up onto the land. So it's going to be insects, and followed by amphibians. So obviously the amphibians couldn't be on the land until they had something that they could eat. So, and insects were first on the land, followed by the amphibians. Ought to know what's the advantage of an amphibian over a fish. Amphibians can crawl up onto the land where they're a little bit more protected than being in the water. Also, you've got ferns, which today are this big, but back then they were the size of a tree. What advantage does a fern have over a lichen? So lichens are about this big. They have a hard time seeing sunlight because they're so small. But these ferns were tall, so they were up closer and could get a better view of the sun, and so that's an advantage for them. Okay, now this is pretty important. So in Missouri, we're talking about the Mississippian period. Mississippian and Pennsylvanian make up the Carboniferous. But the Mississippian is important because this is when coal began to form, and it's also when oil and natural gas began to form. So today, the oil and natural gas that we get and the coal are from this time period. Okay. The rise of the reptiles. So reptiles are starting to dominate over amphibians. So what advantage does a reptile have over an amphibian? Okay, it's because they have a shell. Their eggs have a shell around them which encloses liquids. And then, so it's like laying your eggs in water, but the whole thing is encased in a shelled egg. So that's the advantage that they have. And so amphibians don't live in dry climates, but reptiles can. Same thing for the kind of plants, conifers. So conifer has a seed that is protected by a pine cone, whereas with the fern, the seed is just out there and it's not so well protected. So better methods of reproduction. All right, let's skip this. Okay, now we're going to go into the Triassic, and the reptiles have now dominated over the amphibians, and now we're having the rise of the dinosaurs. And the dinosaurs get bigger and bigger and bigger, and probably would be around today if it wasn't for an asteroid impact in the Yucatan Peninsula. So I'd like for you to know what killed the dinosaurs. So the impact of this asteroid blew material into the atmosphere that blocked out the sun. Without the sun, plants died. Without the plants, the animals died. So that the only thing the thing that survived was mammals, which at this time were very, very small. So mammals survived into our next period. And also flowering plants dominates over conifers. So what advantage does a flowering plant have over a conifer? Remember we said that the conifers had a pine cone. How would you like to eat a pine cone? Not very tasty. How would you like to eat an apple? That's not so bad. Okay, so these flowering plants produce a fruit, and then animals consume the fruit, and then it's a better method of reproduction. Okay, and then you have the ice ages. When the Isthmus of Panama forms, it shuts off the global circulation of water that triggers the ice ages. Okay, and so now let's not talk about how life is organized. So this is not going to be on the exam, so don't worry about it. Okay, let's take a break. And when we come back, we will get back into talking about astronomy.